So, we've been talking about reading the Bible as a story. We've had 2 classes so far. The first class was our introduction, where we talked about reading the Bible as a story. Why we need to read the Bible as a story. What does it mean to read the Bible as a story? How do we read the Bible correctly, including reading it as a story? And then in our second class, I threw all of us a curveball by introducing us to the ancient Near Eastern background. And the reason I had to carry you on that expedition was because that is the setting of the biblical story. And if you don't have the setting, you cannot understand the story. So in our third class, we want to talk about the creation story in Genesis 1 in the beginning. In Genesis 1, we read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters." So in the ancient Hebrew worldview, this is describing the state of chaos before God brings it into order, cosmos. And there are 3 problems here of chaos. There are 3 things that make all of what exists, to use our word, problematic. And those are, number 1, so these are 3 forms of chaos, 3 forms of non-order, 3 problems. The first one is that the earth, some translations say shapeless and empty. Right here in ESV, without form and void. The Hebrew, I think, is tohu va-wohu. Yes, you like that, don't you? Yeah. Now, the idea is that we have earth, but it is shapeless and it's empty. The next problem is we have this darkness. And the third problem is we have these primeval deep waters. So God starts to bring order to chaos by separating and naming. Remember, we've seen that in that ancient Near Eastern worldview, how do you bring things into being is by separating and naming. So first, God deals with the darkness. That's the first problem of the chaos, by creating light, and he separates it from darkness, naming the light day and the darkness night. You with me? Yeah. In so doing, God creates time, and time gives order to life. Secondly, God separates the waters into above and below, and he uses the firmament, in the Hebrew, rakia, that he creates to separate this water above and water below. So that word rakia refers to a flat, pounded out surface. It means to, it's derived from a verb that means to pound or to stomp. And in Genesis 1, it is a word that is used, some translations will say, the vault of the heavens. More traditional translations, like the ESV, will talk about the firmament. The idea is it's something firm. And it's like a beaten slab that is transparent and holds the waters above. On day 3, God separates the waters below, and he names them. So he gathers the waters below into one place. He calls it seas. But in gathering it to one place, that allows the dry land to appear. And he names, notice, he's separating and he's naming. Yeah. He names the dry land earth, or land, and he names the waters below seas. And he creates plants and seeds and fruit trees of the earth. And then on day 4, he creates lights. These are the sun, the moon, and the stars. And he creates these in the firmament of the heavens. So the stars and the sun and the moon, they're fixed in the firmament. Did you catch that? They're not out there where Jupiter is. They're in the firmament. And these are created, he uses them to separate day from night and for signs, seasons, days, and years to give light on the earth. The sun is to rule the day, and the moon is to rule the night. So what God is doing is he's filling the heavens with the heavenly host. Remember, things are formless and empty, so he's organizing and he's filling. And then on day 5, he fills the waters below with living creatures and made birds to fly across the firmament above the earth. So the birds are flying in front of the firmament. And day 6, he fills the earth with living creatures and humankind made in his image to rule the earth. So what we have is waters above separated from waters below. And he creates a separation by use of the firmament. And then he puts the sun, moon, and stars on the firmament to separate day from night and to rule the day and night. And then he separates the waters below so that the earth emerges from it. And the earth is a space in which man can dwell. And having created that space, he fills all of these areas. He fills the heavens with the heavenly host, the sun, moon, and the stars. He fills the water below with sea creatures. And he fills the earth with man and the land animals. Now, the way this works out is we've got these problems we talked about, darkness, a water abyss, and the formless earth. And what God does first, he does some separation to create a space where different beings can exist. And so he separates day from night by creating light, and that deals with the question of darkness. He separates the waters above and from below by creating the firmament, and then he separates the formless earth from the sea, and he creates vegetation. And then he deals with the emptiness problem by population. He fills the darkness by creating, he fills the heavenly space by creating the sun and moon and stars, and they're to rule the day and night like man is supposed to rule the earth. And then he creates birds, and they fly by the waters above, below the firmament, and the fish in the waters below, and then he creates land animals. So all of Genesis 1 is a narration of how God is dealing with chaos and bringing order out of non-order. Are you guys still with me? Yeah. That's what it's about. Now, if we didn't take the time to do the ancient Near East background, you wouldn't understand when I started telling you this. You'd be like, what? Where you get that from, Courtney? Okay, so the biblical cosmos, then, like that of the other ancient Near Eastern cultures, was essentially a cosmos with a fundamental twofold division between heavenly and earthly realms. Okay? In fact, Scripture often refers to the whole cosmos simply as heaven and earth. And I think Richard was saying earlier that when he hears of heavens, it means the whole universe. But I think that's what God means in this text when he refers to the heavens and the earth. It's a merism. It's like you say, from top to bottom. You're talking about everything in between as well. So from heavens, that's the space all the way up there, all the way down to the earth, God is creating everything. That's what it means. So there are no other places outside their cosmos than is covered by the heavenly and the earthly realms. Now, in Mesopotamia, this two-part cosmos could be further divided, and the divisions are very similar to, although not identical, with those we saw above in the Sumerian and the Babylonian cosmos. So basically, you have the heavenly realms, the highest heavens, or the heaven of heavens. That's how they did superlatives, like best in Hebrew. They say King of Kings, or Song of Songs, or Lord of Lords. And so that's why this is translated the highest heavens. And so this realm is the highest of the heavenly realms, and that is inhabited by God, his divine counsel, and the angels. But then we have the waters above the sky, and only thing we know that's up there is water. And then we have the firmament, which is like a sky dome, and that's inhabited by the sun, the moon, and stars, which are celestial bodies. And I don't mean to carry you down a road, but I hope you've noticed that there is an association in the Bible between stars and heavenly beings. For example, when Jesus says, I saw Satan fall from heaven, and he talks about a star falling, there is this association, and then we're told as well that we're going to shine like the stars. There's more there. Don't ask me about that today. Let's creep before we can walk. And then the atmosphere is that area underneath the dome. That is part of the heavens as well, and that's inhabited by the weather and the birds. And then down in the earthly realms of the land, where the humans and land animals are. But then we have the sea, where the fish and sea monsters are. That's a whole other rabbit hole. And then we have waters under the earth, where water and maybe some water creatures exist. And then we have Sheol, the place of the dead, the underworld, where only the dead exists. So this is what their ancient cosmology looks like. The heavens are comprised of different segments. So this is the atmosphere, where the birds and so fly. And then you have the starry hosts, which really are in the firmament. And then you have the rakia, which is the sky dome. And you have a space above the sky dome. And if one goes past the birds, past the clouds, past the stars, in their concept, you'd have to go through a door in order to, in the solid vault, in order to get to the highest heaven, which was the dwelling place of God. And then, of course, you have the earth. You see it on its foundations, and it's separated from the waters, and there are waters even beneath the earth. So here's some more pictures. I won't spend too much time on this. It really, in their mind, was like different floors in a house. So we're on the ground floor. And we can't go upstairs because we don't have a plane to fly go up there. Only the birds can go up there. And the first floor is the atmosphere. So that's the next level above us. And that's separated from the second floor by the firmament, which is kind of like the floor of the second floor, but the ceiling of the first floor. And the stars are like the light in that ceiling. And God and the heavenly beings lived on the second floor, which you can't see from down here. Okay? Beneath the land is an underground fresh water. And that's because this is springs coming up from the deep. Water comes from under the earth, so they think water is under the earth. But also under the earth is Sheol, the place of the dead. It's like a basement to which the living had no access and from which the dead could not escape. And there's a spectrum of holiness here, where up here in the highest heavens, the heaven of heavens, is God's dwelling place. This is the holiest place. And when you come all down, it's a spectrum. Less holy, less holy. Earth is less holy than heaven. But the most unholy place is the place of the dead and the great deep. Okay? So, why? Why what? Was it unholy? Well, because it's occupied by the dead. So in their way of thinking, God is all the way in heaven. God is holy. The place of the dead is a shadowy place. In their concept of the world, death is a very unholy thing. And so all I'm saying is it's a spectrum. In their conception, you move from earth towards heaven, you're going more holy. And when you come down, less holy. And that's important because it helps us to understand why God coming down to earth is a big deal. If you think, oh yeah man, God can come, we don't understand what he's doing to be with us. You know what I'm saying? We understand, for example, if, I don't know, maybe this is not a good analogy in this generation, if the Queen of England were to come and then to stay under your roof. I know she's no longer with us. You don't understand, it's a big deal, right? Because she's coming down in a social sense. You understand what I mean? This is the concept. All right, so this is the Hebrew conception of the world that God created. And God was communicating to them using a cosmological framework that they could understand. In other words, because they're in a certain environment where this is how everybody thought, God is speaking into their reality using language and a framework that they got. But God is communicating through them a message that is for us also. And the message he was communicating for us was not about how the universe is structured. The Bible is not a science book. God is not trying to do that in Genesis. If he were to try to do it, you wouldn't understand what he gave you. What he's trying to do in Genesis is to tell you who he is, who you are, where you came from, what is the nature of the world that you live in terms of its purpose, and where he's trying to lead us. Okay, so the message that God was communicating through the ancient Israelites for all peoples in all times, in all places, including us, is why the world was created and why we're here. And the message that God has communicated is that in creating the universe, God, in creating the universe, God is creating a place for man to dwell. Now, one of the things that you notice in Genesis is after God does his naming and his separating on each day, it says that God saw that it was good. In what sense was it good? Was it morally good? No. Here's how it was good. It was good for us to exist. That's how it's good. In other words, God is looking at it and saying it is serving the functional purpose that he's doing this naming and this separating for. He's creating a space where man can dwell. But God created the world a good place for man to live, but there were elements in the created world that still needed to be brought under order. This is the implication of man dwelling in a world in which the forces of chaos are held at bay by a bubble that God has created. You realize that's the picture, right? So the chaos has not gone away. And this is part of, I think, the idea of in the beginning. Because God is not done with where he wants to take this cosmos he's created. Because we still have the sea. We're going to get there. But in Revelation, we're told, and there was no longer any sea. That's an end point. So the world that we live in their concept, is a world that God creates good for us. But it's still a dangerous world, where there are still forces of non-order that exist. And so what God has done is he's created a bubble. He's created a space where we can live even though we're surrounded by the potential forces of chaos, that God is the one who is keeping it at bay. Before we look down our noses at these guys, they're onto something. See, we're into the material, what kind of physical world we have. They're into the spiritual. What is the nature of this world that we live in? Maybe a month ago, my wife was she went somewhere in Jamaica, I think Ferry, to view a property that she, I don't know how many of you know, Lavette is involved in real estate now. And she went to view a property, she went with someone, and she shared her location with me. And then I at some point I look at my phone, and her car is somewhere in Augustown. She didn't tell me she was going to Augustown. And I start trying to call her. And she's not answering. And I call my good friend Ron Wong. I said, Ron, I get in the car, I say nothing to the kids, and I start driving to Augustown. And I called my friend Ron Wong, and I told him the story. I said, where do you think it's Augustown? Augustown. So he says, I think you should go to the police station. So I'm on my way to the police station. Eventually, my wife calls. She's okay. You know what that moment taught me? My entire life is on the edge of chaos. In one moment, my life could move from a nice, ordered, good world to chaos. We live in a dangerous world. Yesterday, I'm coming out of Fontana. I bought some Wendy's for me and the kids. And I'm coming out of the intersection. It's a dual carriageway. Vehicles are only supposed to come from here. I look that way. I start moving. And I hear crank. And I look, and there's a motorbike running right across my car. Guy scratches the front of the car. He has no license. He has no insurance. He's saying, "Me think you see me." I talked to my wife, we were on the phone, she said, "Man, I'm glad God protected you." I could have run over him. At that point, no matter who is right or wrong, chaos. Chaos. And sometimes the chaos does break through, doesn't it? But I think before we start dismissing this idea, we've got to understand that we live in a world. It's not saying that when God created the world, he got rid of all of the non-order. The non-order is still there, all right? And God's intention was to extend the order, we're going to see in a short while, that he created a certain space across all of the world. We blow it, and we introduce non-order is kind of like benign. We introduce sin, which is disorder. So it's not just it needs to be ordered. This is degenerative. It corrupts. It deteriorates. It's a problem. It's like this is malignant. Are you with me here? But God starts out by creating this world because he's trying to create a space not just where God can live, not just where man can live, but he's trying to create a space that he can live with man. Right. My office, I had to put a chair in there because after, we built that office, in my mind, this is my space. And then I had a conversation with my wife where she said, she needs to feel like she can, no matter how busy I am, she can come in. So we came with the concept of the chair. Well, God is not like me where, man, I just said, give me like a space. God didn't create an office for himself. He was really creating a living room. He was creating a space that we could share with him. All right. Now, I think part of what we have to understand is that what God is creating is a cosmic temple. And I'm trying to see if I can get my slide to show me my notes, but whatever I miss, the Lord is saying we don't need it. All right. Okay, let me keep going. So it really is a cosmic temple that God is creating. So, in Genesis 2, we're told, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them, and on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done. And he rested, in Hebrew, Sabbath, on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested, Sabbath, from all his work that he had done in creation. Now, what does it mean when it says that God rested? Did God take a nap? Was he tired after working so hard? He said, whoo, let me go take a sleep. If we conceive of this as saying that God took a break, then day 6 is the climax. And day 7 is anticlimactic. But I think we all know that 7 reflects perfection in the Hebrew way of thinking. Completion. And so 7 is supposed to be the climax. Now, this slide is actually on your handout. You can go back to it later. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. The point that I want to make is that there is a correlation between the 7 days of Genesis 1 to 2, which each open with a command where God says something and ends in day 7 in this Sabbath. There's a correlation between that pattern. Remember, Hebrew narrative, repetition of patterns, and the creation and completion of the tabernacle and of the temple. With the tabernacle and the temple, we have these 7 speeches that end with a Sabbath, saying what to do. And then there is the 7 acts of obedience, which end with, in Exodus 40, divine rest. And in 1 Kings, we have these 7 prayers of Solomon that end with God going into the temple and with these 7-day feasts. Now, I think what we're supposed to understand is that what's happening in the temple and the tabernacle correlates with what goes on in Genesis 1. So really, on day 7, when God rested, what's going on is God is going into the cosmic temple he has created. So that word Sabbath means to cease or to stop. And the idea is that you complete certain activity, but this activity leads to another kind of rest. And that rest is denoted by a noun, menucha, referring to rest or resting place. That's a new state that you're able to enter into because you finished your work. Or the verb nuach, which means to settle down or rest. And that involves entering a position of safety, security, or stability. And the related noun, as I said, refers to the place where that is found. So in Genesis 2, the verb Sabbath describes a transition into an activity of where you're able to settle down. So in the Old Testament, the idea that nuach rest involves engagement in normal activities that can be carried out when stability has been achieved. You can see that, for example, in Deuteronomy 12. Where, God says, but when you go over the Jordan and then live in the land that the Lord your God has given you to inherit, and when he gives you rest, that word is nuach, from all your enemies around, so that you live in safety, then to the place your Lord your God will choose to make his name dwell there, you shall bring all your offerings, etc., etc. So the idea is that once God has conquered the land, then they can rest. But that rest don't mean that them just go to sleep. It means that they can now embark on the things that God had put them in the promised land to do. So in the same way, in Genesis 2, after God spends 7 days setting up the cosmos, he can now cease from that work of creative activity and settle down in the cosmos he's built and get down to doing what he intended to do, which is to rule the cosmos and dwell with man. And we know this, for example, Exodus 20:11 says, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and he rested, nuach, on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. So most of us, when we think of rest, we think of putting up our feet. But in their way of thinking, rest means like when God says, I give you rest from all your enemies, you can actually now do what you're supposed to do in the land. It means God is now able to go into his cosmic temple he's created and do what he's supposed to do there, which is dwell, be worshipped, and rule. So John Walton writes, a reader from the ancient world would know immediately what was going on and recognize the role of day 7. Without hesitation, the ancient reader would conclude that this is a temple text and that day 7 is the most important of the 7 days. It is a true climax without which nothing else would make sense or have any meaning. Deity rests in a temple and only in a temple. This is what temples were built for. This is what a temple is, a place for divine rest. In some texts, the construction of a temple is associated with cosmic creation. All right, so this is my office. It's all finished, right? What is missing? That's right. The person for whom it was created to be in that space and rule. I'm kidding. This is the idea. So when we are finished creating the office space, I didn't go in my bed and sleep. I said, yeah, man, now we can get down to business, and I'm going to use the space. This is what God is doing when on day 7 he goes in, he's going into his cosmic temple, his dwelling place, in order to dwell. So Walton says the role of the temple in ancient Israel was not only a place where people gathered for worship, it is first and foremost a place for the deity, sacred space. It's God's home. But more importantly, his headquarters, the control room. When the deity rests in his temple, it means that he's taking command. He's mounting his throne to assume his rightful place and his proper role. Okay, still not convinced? Let's look at Psalm 132. So in Psalm 132, we're told, let us go to his, referring to God, dwelling place. And the word here, dwelling place, is actually a word that is related to Shekinah, referring to God's actual temple. Okay? So let's go to God's dwelling place. Let's worship at his footstool. Okay? Saying, arise, Lord, and come to your resting place, Menucha, you and the ark of your might. So let's do some parallelism. Dwelling place is equal to resting place. Are you with me? Yeah. And footstool is equal to ark, and the ark is in the temple. So this psalm is telling us that God's temple is his resting place. So when God rests, it means he's going into his temple. Are you with me? Yeah. Or in verse 13, for the Lord has chosen Zion. That's where the temple is. He has desired it for his dwelling. It's a similar word referring to the temple, saying, this is my resting place, Menucha. Okay? Forever and ever, here I will sit enthroned, for I have desired it. So again, Zion is equivalent to resting place, and dwelling is equivalent to being enthroned. So this psalm not only tells us that God's resting means him going into his temple, but it is telling us that a part of his resting is his ruling, because he's going on his throne. That's what the temple was perceived as. The ark was God's footstool because his throne was above the cherubim. So God goes in and he sits. He's going to rule the cosmos. It is a cosmic temple. And so what we find is that God's glory actually enters the tabernacle after it's built. This is equivalent to after the cosmic temple is built, God goes in and dwells there. And the cloud fills the temple so much that people can't go in. And we have the same thing with, I'm sorry, I said the temple, I mean the tabernacle. We have the same thing that happens with the temple, that when it was completed, this cloud, which represents God's glory, fills the house of the Lord, so the priest could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Now, this idea of God's glory filling the house or the temple, it goes beyond the earthly temple that was created. And we have a picture in the Bible that God not only wants to fill that little space, he wants to fill the whole earth. So Psalm 72 says, praise be to the Lord God, the God of Israel, who alone does marvelous deeds. Praise be to his glorious name forever. May the whole earth be filled with his glory. In the same way that God filled the earthly temple, he wants to fill the whole earth. That means all of the earth is a part of God's temple. That means all of the earth is supposed to be sacred space. We have the same idea in Numbers 14. Truly as I live and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. Isaiah 6 verse 3, Isaiah, he sees the Lord. God is in heaven, but his robe fills the earthly temple because the earthly temple is a doorway to the heavenly temple. And so God is in heaven on his throne, and his robe is here on earth by his footstool, the ark. And he sees the heavenly beings, the seraphim, and they're saying, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, because God had filled the whole temple. He says the whole earth is full of all his glory. God wants to fill all of the earth because all of the earth is a part of this cosmic temple that he dwells in. And then in Habakkuk, the same idea. The earth will be filled with knowledge of the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. Okay.